empty because she gave what little food she had to a sick grandmother. But despite all this, May carried herself with quiet dignity, her eyes reflecting both hardship and an unshakable hope that things would someday get better. One fateful morning, as fate loves to intervene when you least expect it, May found herself face to face with someone who would change her life forever, a man whose name echoed through headlines and boardrooms alike. CEO Ethan Langston. Ethan was not your typical billionaire. Sure, he wore tailored suits, drove luxury cars, and owned more properties than one could count. But beneath his polished exterior lay a restless soul searching for something money couldn't buy. That day, he had decided to take a rare break from his hectic schedule and visit the countryside, hoping to escape the suffocating world of corporate politics. Little did he know, this detour would lead him straight into May's humble home, where she served him a bowl of congee made from scraps salvaged from leftover rice and vegetables. It wasn't much, but it was everything she hadn't somehow. In that simple act of generosity, Ethan felt something stirred deep within him, something he couldn't quite put into words. The moment their eyes met over that steaming bowl of congee, time seemed to stand still. For May, it was nothing unusual. Offering food to strangers was simply how she survived. But for Ethan it was different. There was something about the way she looked at him, not with awe or envy like most people did when they recognized him, but with kindness and sincerity. In that fleeting exchange, Ethan saw past the rags and the weary expression on her face. He saw strength, resilience, and a warmth that no amount of wealth could replicate. As he took the first spoonful of the humble dish, he realized it tasted far richer than any five-star meal he'd ever had. And though neither of them knew it yet, this encounter marked the beginning of a story neither could have imagined. That as days turned into weeks, Ethan found himself returning to the village again and again, drawn by an inexplicable pull he couldn't ignore. At first he told himself it was curiosity about the girl who had fed him without expecting anything in return. But soon it became clear that it was more than that. Every time he saw May, whether she was tending to her grandmother or working tirelessly under the scorching sun, he felt a strange ache in his chest, a longing to shield her from the harshness of the world. Meanwhile, May remained oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside him. To her, Ethan was just another stranger passing through, albeit one who seemed unusually interested in her mundane life. Yet, his presence brought unexpected changes, subtle shifts she couldn't quite explain. Ethan began showering May with gifts, not extravagant ones, but thoughtful gestures that spoke volumes. A new blanket for her grandmother, fresh produce delivered anonymously to her doorstep, even discreetly paying off some of her debts. Each act of kindness left May puzzled and slightly uneasy. She didn't understand why someone like him would bother helping someone like her. Was it pity, guilt, or was there something else lurking beneath the surface? Despite her confusion, she couldn't deny the relief these acts brought to her otherwise overwhelming life. Slowly, tentatively, she started trusting him, allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, good fortune wasn't reserved only for others. But trust came with its own set of complications. The villagers began whispering behind closed doors, their voices tinged with suspicion and envy. How could a poor girl like May catch the attention of such a powerful man? What strings was she pulling? Even May's grandmother, frail and bedridden, voiced her concerns, warning her granddaughter to be cautious. Powerful men don't do things out of pure kindness, she rasped one evening, gripping May's hand tightly. There's always a price. Those words haunted May long after her grandmother drifted off to sleep. She wanted to believe in Ethan's intentions, but doubt gnawed at her relentlessly. Who was he, really, and what did he want from her? Meanwhile, Ethan wrestled with his own demons. Back in the city, his colleagues noticed a shift in him. Gone was the ruthless negotiator who crushed competitors without blinking. Instead, they saw a man distracted, softer somehow, his mind clearly elsewhere. Rumors swirled about a mysterious woman in his life, though no one dared ask directly. For Ethan, keeping May's existence a secret wasn't just about protecting her. It was about safeguarding the fragile connection they shared. He feared that if anyone discovered her, they'd exploit her vulnerability, dragging her into a world she wasn't ready for. But secrets have a way of unraveling, and the closer Ethan grew to May, the more precarious their situation became. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Ethan finally mustered the courage to confess his feelings. Sitting beside May outside her modest home, he took a deep breath and said the words that had been weighing heavily on his heart. May, I think I'm falling in love with you. His voice trembled, betraying the confidence he usually exuded. May froze, her wide eyes mirroring shock and disbelief. Love, from someone like him. It sounded too absurd, too impossible to be true. Yet, looking into his earnest gaze, she couldn't dismiss it outright. Could love really bloom between two people separated by worlds so vastly different? Before May could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps shattered the moment. A group of villagers appeared, their faces grim and accusatory. They demanded answers, accusing Ethan of using his influence to manipulate May. Panic surged through her veins as she realized the fragile peace she'd built was crumbling right before her eyes. Ethan stood up, his tall frame towering over the crowd, but even his commanding presence couldn't quell the rising tension. As accusations flew back and forth, May felt torn between loyalty to her community and the growing bond she shared with Ethan just when it seemed like the confrontation might escalate further. A sudden revelation threw everyone off balance, including May and Ethan themselves. It turned out that one of the villagers had uncovered a shocking truth about Ethan's past, a secret tied to the very land May called home. The revelation forced both of them to confront questions they'd been avoiding. Who was Ethan, truly? And what role did he play in the history of this place? With tempers flaring and emotions running high, the scene dissolved into chaos, leaving May and Ethan standing amidst the wreckage of broken trust and unanswered questions. As the dust settled, Ethan turned to May, desperation etched across his face. "Please," he pleaded, "let me explain." But May, overwhelmed and confused, could only shake her head. The divide between them had never felt wider, and so the story hung precariously in the balance, teetering on the edge of resolution and ruin. Would May find it in her heart to forgive Ethan and hear him out? Or would the weight of his secrets drive them apart forever? As the night enveloped the village in darkness, the air thick with uncertainty, one thing was certain: their lives would never be the same again. The revelation that had sent shockwaves through the village was more than just a rumor. It was a piece of history buried deep beneath layers of time, waiting to resurface. Decades ago, Ethan's family had owned vast tracts of land in this very region. They weren't just wealthy, they were powerful, their influence stretching across industries and communities. But with power came greed, and with greed came exploitation. The Langstons had driven many families off their ancestral lands, forcing them into poverty while claiming the fertile soil for themselves. Though generations had passed since then, the scars remained etched into the collective memory of the villagers. And now, here was Ethan Langston, standing among them, a living reminder of the injustice his family had once inflicted. May listened to the murmurs around her, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't known about this dark chapter of Ethan's past. How could she? He had never spoken of it, and she had never asked. To her, he was simply the man who had shown her unexpected kindness, someone whose presence brought fleeting moments of light into her otherwise bleak existence. But now, as the pieces fell into place, doubt crept in like a shadow. Was his generosity truly selfless, or was it guilt masquerading as compassion? Had he come to this village seeking redemption? Something else entirely. May didn't know what to believe anymore. All she knew was that the ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as if the truth she thought she understood was crumbling away. Ethan, for his part, looked visibly shaken. His sharp jawline tightened, and his usually composed demeanor faltered. Under the weight of accusation, for years he had distanced himself from the legacy of his family's empire, choosing instead to carve out his own path in business. Yet, no matter how far he ran, the sins of the past seemed determined to follow him. Now faced with the raw anger and pain of the villagers, he realized there was no escaping it. This wasn't just about him, it was about the bloodline he carried, the name he bore. As much as he wanted to defend himself, to explain that he wasn't the same man his ancestors had been, the words caught in his throat. What could he say that would undo decades of hurt? The tension between Ethan and the villagers reached a boiling point when one elderly woman stepped forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "You think you can waltz in here, throwing your money around and make everything right?" she spat, pointing a gnarled finger at him. "We don't need your charity. We need justice." Her words ignited a chorus of agreement, the crowd closing in around Ethan like a tightening noose. May watched helplessly, torn between defending the man who had shown her kindness and siding with her people, who had every reason to feel betrayed. It was a conflict she hadn't asked for, yet one she couldn't avoid. As the confrontation escalated, Ethan finally found his voice. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone," he said, his tone firm but laced with regret. "I came because I needed to escape my own world. I didn't know what my family had done here until tonight." His gaze shifted to May, searching for some sign of understanding, some flicker of trust. "And when I met May, I saw something in her, something real, something pure. That's why I stayed." His confession hung heavy in the air, met with skepticism and scorn. To the villagers, it sounded like an excuse, a feeble attempt to justify his presence. But to May, it struck a chord. Deep down, she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that his feelings for her were genuine, untainted by ulterior motives. But belief required faith, and faith was hard to come by when surrounded by so much pain. That night, after the chaos had subsided and the villagers dispersed, May sat alone in the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, her mind racing. Her grandmother lay asleep in the corner, oblivious to the turmoil swirling outside. May stared at the cracked walls of their tiny home, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She had always known life was unfair, that the odds were stacked against her, but this tangled web of history, betrayal, and emotion was more than she felt equipped to handle. What was she supposed to do? Turn her back on Ethan, the man who had given her hope during her darkest days, or stand by him, risking the wrath of her community and possibly losing the only family she had left? Her thoughts drifted back to the first time she met Ethan, to the simplicity of that moment. She had been wary of him then, too, unsure of what to make of the wealthy stranger who wandered into her life uninvited. Yet, over time, she had let her guard down, allowing herself to see the humanity behind the polished exterior. Now, that humanity was being called into question, not just by others but by her own doubts. Was Ethan truly the man she thought he was, or was he merely another product of the system that had oppressed her ancestors? The uncertainty gnawed at her, leaving her restless and uneasy. Meanwhile, Ethan retreated to the small inn where he had been staying during his visits to the village. Sleep eluded him as he replayed the events of the evening in his mind, each accusation cutting deeper than the last. He had always prided himself on building his success independently, free from the shadow of his family's tainted reputation. But tonight, he realized that no amount of personal achievement could erase the sins of the past. The villagers' anger was justified, and their mistrust was earned not by him directly, but by the lineage he represented. The realization left him hollow, questioning whether he deserved any chance at redemption, let alone love. Determined to set things right, Ethan spent the next morning drafting a letter to the village elders. In it, he acknowledged the wrongs committed by his family and pledged to take action. He proposed returning the disputed lands to their rightful owners, investing in local infrastructure, and ensuring that the profits generated from the area benefited the community rather than lining corporate pockets. It was a bold move, one that risked alienating his shareholders and tarnishing his carefully cultivated image. But for the first time in his life, Ethan cared less about appearances and more about doing what was right. Whether the villagers would accept his offer remained uncertain, but he knew he had to try. When word of Ethan's proposal reached May, she felt a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. Perhaps this was his way of proving his sincerity, of showing that he wasn't bound by the mistakes of those who came before him. Still, she couldn't shake the nagging fear that trusting him might cost her everything. The villagers, already suspicious of outsiders, viewed Ethan's sudden change of heart with skepticism. Some dismissed it as a calculated PR stunt, while others saw it as a desperate attempt to win May's affection. Either way, tensions simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. Amidst the growing unrest, May found herself drawn to Ethan despite her reservations. There was an honesty in his eyes, a vulnerability that mirrored her own. When they crossed paths later that day, their interaction was charged with unspoken emotions. "Why are you doing this?" May asked softly, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. Ethan hesitated, his gaze fixed on hers. "Because I can't keep pretending that none of this matters," he admitted. "Because seeing you look at me the way you did last night, it broke something inside me. I don't want to lose you, May, not because of something I didn't even know I was responsible for." His words stirred something within her, a longing she had tried to suppress. Yet even as her heart yearned to trust him, her mind screamed caution. Love, she realized, was a dangerous thing in times like these. It blurred lines, clouded judgment, and made people vulnerable in ways they couldn't afford to be. And yet, wasn't vulnerability also what made love worth fighting for? May didn't have answers, only questions that seemed to multiply with each passing day. As the days turned into weeks, the village remained divided. Some villagers began warming to Ethan's proposals, seeing them as a rare opportunity to reclaim what had been stolen from them. Others remained staunchly opposed, unwilling to forgive or forget. Meanwhile, May found herself caught in the middle, her loyalty tested at every turn. Her grandmother, frail but fiercely protective, urged her to distance herself from Ethan. "He's playing games with your heart, child," she warned. "Don't let him destroy what little we have left." May nodded, though her heart ached with indecision. Just when it seemed like the situation might stabilize, another twist threw everything into disarray. A journalist from the city arrived in the village, eager to uncover the story behind the CEO's mysterious connection to this remote corner of the countryside. Word spread quickly, and soon reporters descended upon the area, hungry for headlines. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, and private conversations became public spectacles. The intrusion added fuel to the fire, reigniting old wounds and amplifying existing tensions. For May, the scrutiny was suffocating. She had never sought attention, yet now she found herself at the center of a media storm, her every move dissected and debated. Ethan, too, struggled under the spotlight. His attempts to make amends were overshadowed by sensationalized narratives, painting him as either a savior or a manipulator depending on who was telling the story. The pressure mounted, pushing both him and May to their limits. Each day brought new challenges, new revelations, and new reasons to question whether their bond could withstand the forces tearing at it. Amidst the chaos, one thing remained clear. The days that followed were a blur of noise and chaos, the once peaceful village now feeling like a battleground. Reporters swarmed the narrow dirt paths, their cameras clicking incessantly, while satellite vans lined the outskirts like invaders, claiming territory. May found herself avoiding eye contact with strangers, her head bowed as she hurried to fetch water or tend to her grandmother. Every step felt heavier than the last, not just because of the physical exhaustion but because of the invisible weight of judgment pressing down on her. She could feel the villagers' eyes on her, some filled with pity, others with suspicion. Whispers trailed behind her like shadows. Does she really think she can trust him? What does he want from her? The question stung more than she cared to admit. Ethan, too, was struggling to navigate the storm he had inadvertently unleashed. He tried to keep his distance from the media circus, knowing full well that anything he said would be twisted into clickbait headlines. But staying away wasn't an option either, not when every interview seemed to paint him in a harsher light. One journalist boldly accused him of exploiting May's poverty for publicity. Another suggested his land restitution plan was nothing more than a PR stunt designed to polish his tarnished image. Each accusation cut deeper. Not because they weren't partially true, his initial intentions had been selfish, but because he knew he had grown beyond them. Yet how could he prove it to people who refused to see past his wealth and status? Amidst the turmoil, May began to notice subtle shifts in the dynamics around her. Some villagers, emboldened by Ethan's proposal, started organizing meetings to discuss what should happen next. A few even dared to dream of a better future, one where their children wouldn't have to leave the village to find work. Others remained bitterly opposed, convinced that Ethan's promises were hollow and that trusting him would only lead to further betrayal. These divisions spilled over into everyday interactions, turning neighbors against each other and fracturing the tight-knit community May had always known. It pained her to see friendships strained and alliances broken, all because of a man she still didn't fully understand. One evening, as May sat by her grandmother's bedside, she heard raised voices coming from outside. Curiosity pulled her to the window, where she saw a group of men gathered near the village square. At the center stood Ethan, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. Beside him was old Mr. Chen, the eldest villager and unofficial leader, his cane trembling slightly as he addressed the crowd. "We've suffered enough at the hands of your family," Mr. Chen declared, his voice gravelly but firm. "Why should we believe you won't do the same?" Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, someone else shouted, "You're using May to get to us. Don't think we don't see through your games." May's heart sank. She wanted to intervene, to defend Ethan or at least demand answers, but something held her back. Instead, she watched silently as the argument escalated, the air thick with anger and mistrust. Ethan's face flushed red, whether from frustration or shame, she couldn't tell. Finally, he raised his hands in surrender. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said, his tone measured but tinged with desperation. "All I'm asking is for a chance to make things right, if you'll let me." His words hung in the air, met with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant curiosity. For a moment it seemed like the tide might turn in his favor. Then someone muttered, "Actions speak louder than words," and the crowd dispersed, leaving Ethan standing alone under the fading twilight. That night, unable to sleep, May wandered outside, drawn to the fields where she often went to think. The cool breeze carried the scent of damp earth, a comforting reminder of simpler times. She wasn't surprised to find Ethan there, sitting cross-legged on the ground, staring up at the stars. He looked smaller somehow, less like the towering figure she'd first encountered and more like a man weighed down by regrets. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach him or retreat back into the safety of her home. Before she could decide, he spoke without looking at her. "Do you hate me now?" The question caught her off guard. Hate? No, she didn't hate him. Confusion? Yes. Frustration? Definitely. But hate? That required a clarity she didn't possess. "I don't know what to feel," she admitted, sinking onto the grass beside him. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the rustling leaves. "You say you want to help, but everything feels so complicated." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It is complicated," he said after a pause. "I can't undo what my family did. I can't erase the pain they caused. All I can do is try to fix what's broken, even if it's too late for forgiveness." There was a rawness in his voice, a vulnerability that made her chest tighten. For the first time, she saw him not as the powerful CEO or the stranger tied to a painful history, but as a man grappling with his own demons. Their conversation stretched long into the night, neither of them offering solutions, only questions. May shared stories of growing up in the village, of watching her mother struggle to provide for their family before succumbing to illness. Ethan spoke of his father, a ruthless, this businessman who had taught him that success came at any cost, including morality. They talked about loss, guilt, and the quiet ache of wanting to belong somewhere. By the time the first rays of dawn broke through the darkness, they had reached no conclusions, only a fragile understanding that they were both searching for redemption, in their own ways. Meanwhile, tensions continued to simmer beneath the surface. The arrival of the journalists had brought attention not just to Ethan's proposal but also to the village itself. Offers began pouring in from developers and investors eager to capitalize on the newfound spotlight. Promises of jobs, infrastructure, and modernization sounded tempting, especially to younger villagers desperate for opportunities. But older generations resisted, fearing that outsiders would exploit their land yet again. This clash of ideals created new fractures within the community. forcing everyone to take sides. For May, the pressure became unbearable. She found herself torn between loyalty to her roots and the possibility of a brighter future. Her grandmother, sensing her turmoil, offered quiet wisdom one afternoon. "Sometimes, child," she said, her frail hand gripping May's, "the hardest choices aren't between right and wrong, but between two rights or two wrongs." Those words lingered in May's mind, haunting her as she navigated the increasingly complex web of decisions surrounding her. As weeks turned into months, Ethan's efforts to rebuild trust began showing signs of progress, albeit slow and fragile. He worked alongside the villagers, rolling up his sleeves to repair dilapidated structures and planting trees on barren plots of land. His presence became less intrusive, more collaborative. Yet, despite these gestures, skepticism remained. Some villagers appreciated his efforts. Others dismissed them as superficial attempts to win favor. Even May, who had started to soften toward him, struggled to reconcile the man she was getting to know with the shadow of his family's legacy. Then came the letter. A single envelope slipped under May's door one morning. Inside was a formal document detailing legal claims to the disputed lands, signed by representatives of Ethan's corporation. At first glance, it appeared to support his promise of restitution. But buried in the fine print were clauses that hinted at loopholes, conditions that could allow the company to reclaim control under certain circumstances. May's stomach churned as she read and reread the pages, her mind racing with implications. Was this proof of Ethan's sincerity or evidence of his duplicity? She confronted him later that day, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "Did you know about this?" she demanded, shoving the papers into his hands. The face went pale as he scanned the document, his fingers tightening around the edges. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "I swear I didn't authorize this." His denial sounded genuine, but doubt gnawed at her. Who else could have orchestrated such a move if not him? The revelation threw everything into question once again, reigniting old fears and suspicions. The fallout was swift and brutal. Rumors spread like wildfire, painting Ethan as a wolf in sheep's clothing. Villagers who had begun to trust him turned their backs, accusing him of playing them for fools. Even those who had defended him started to waver, unsure of what to believe. As for May, she retreated into herself, withdrawing from both Ethan and the community. The weight of betrayal, whether real or perceived, was too much to bear, and yet, amidst the chaos, moments of connection persisted. Late at night, when the world seemed impossibly vast and cruel, May and Ethan would steal glances at each other across crowded rooms, their eyes conveying what words could not. In those fleeting exchanges, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the complexity of their situation, a recognition that love and trust were intertwined with history and pain. Whether that fragile bond could survive the storm remained uncertain, but neither of them was ready to give up, not yet. The days leading up to the village council's final decision felt like a slow unraveling, each moment stretching thinner than the last. The air was heavy with anticipation, every conversation laced with tension. May could feel it in the way people avoided her gaze, how whispers trailed off when she approached. Even the fields, once vibrant and alive, seemed muted under the weight of uncertainty. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore, it was about trust, survival, and the fragile balance holding their community together. And yet, as much as she tried to focus on the bigger picture, her thoughts kept drifting back to him. Ethan had become a ghost haunting the edges of her life, present but distant, his usual confidence replaced by a quiet desperation. He spent hours walking the perimeter of the village, his phone buzzing incessantly with calls from lawyers, shareholders, and PR teams urging him to cut his losses and leave. But he stayed, stubbornly clinging to the hope that he could salvage anything from the wreckage. May noticed the toll it was taking on him, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged as if carrying an invisible burden. Still, she couldn't bring herself to reach out, not after the letter, not when doubt lingered like a shadow between them. The night before the council meeting, the village buzzed with nervous energy. Lanterns flickered in doorways, casting long shadows across dirt paths, while hushed arguments spilled out of open windows. Old alliances crumbled, new ones formed, and everyone braced for what might come next. May sat alone in her tiny home, staring at the legal document that had turned everything upside down. She had read it so many times, the words blurred together, but one phrase stuck in her mind: conditional ownership. What did it mean? Was it a safeguard or a trap? Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head, two rights or two wrongs, but clarity remained elusive. Outside, the sound of footsteps startled her. She froze, her heart pounding as the creak of the wooden door announced an unexpected visitor. There stood Ethan, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the lantern hanging above her porch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, he said, "I need you to hear me out." His voice was raw, stripped of its usual polish, and it made her hesitate. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit. Instead, he paced the small room, running his hands through his hair as if trying to pull the words out of his skull. "I didn't know about those clauses," he began, his tone urgent. I swear to you, May, I wouldn't have signed off on anything that could hurt this place or you. He finally stopped moving, turning to face her with an intensity that made her stomach twist, but someone else did. Someone high up in my company must have gone behind my back. They're using this whole situation to push their own agenda, and I don't even know who to trust anymore. May wanted to believe him. She truly did. But belief required faith, and faith felt like a luxury she couldn't afford, not when so much was at stake. Why should I? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How do I know you're not lying to protect yourself? Ethan flinched, as if she'd struck him. Because I came here for you, May, he said, his voice cracking. Not because of guilt or obligation or some twisted game. You changed me. Before you, I didn't care about consequences. I didn't care about anyone but myself. But now, he trailed off, shaking his head. Now I can't imagine walking away from this, not from you, not from what we've built together, however broken it is. His confession left her breathless, her chest tightening with emotion she couldn't untangle. Love, anger, fear, they all collided inside her, making it impossible to think clearly. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers that would make everything make sense. But nothing about this situation made sense. Instead, she simply nodded, unable to find the right words. Ethan lingered for a moment longer, then turned and walked out into the night, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The next morning, the village square was packed with people, their faces etched with anxiety and resolve. The council meeting was set to begin, and everyone knew this was the moment of truth. Would they accept Ethan's proposal and risk being betrayed again? Or would they reject it and continue living in poverty, clinging to the scraps of dignity they had left? The tension was palpable, thick enough to choke on. May arrived late, slipping into the back of the crowd unnoticed. Her eyes scanned the sea of faces until they landed on Ethan, standing near the front beside Mr. Chen. He looked exhausted but determined, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. As the elders took their seats, the murmurs died down, replaced by an eerie silence. One by one they spoke, weighing the pros and cons of Ethan's offer. Some praised his efforts, pointing to the repairs he'd made and the jobs he'd created. Others argued that trusting him was too risky, that history had already proven the Langston name meant betrayal. The debate raged on for hours, each side digging in deeper, refusing to yield. Through it all, May watched Ethan, searching for any sign of weakness or deceit. But there was none, only a man standing at the edge of ruin, fighting for something greater than himself. Just when it seemed like no consensus could be reached, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A group of men pushed their way through the crowd, dragging someone with them. May's blood ran cold when she recognized the figure. It was Daniel, Ethan's longtime business partner and closest confidant. His hands were bound, his face bruised and swollen. Behind him stood several villagers, their expressions grim. We caught him tampering with documents, one of them announced, holding up a stack of papers. He was planning to sell the land to developers without your approval. The revelation sent shockwaves through the gathering. Gasps rippled through the crowd as heads turned toward Ethan, who stared at Daniel in stunned disbelief. What have you done? He whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising din. Daniel smirked, unrepentant. What needed to be done? He spat. You were throwing away everything we worked for, a fortune in profits for some girl and a bunch of peasants. I wasn't going to let that happen. For a moment time seemed to freeze. May felt the ground shift beneath her feet, the world tilting dangerously. Betrayal upon betrayal layered upon itself, creating a tangled web of lies and motives. Ethan staggered backward, his face pale with rage and disbelief. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but lethal. You crossed the line, Daniel. You're done. Turning to the villagers, he added, this isn't me. This isn't who I am. If you'll give me one more chance, I'll prove it to you. The crowd erupted into chaos, voices shouting over each other as accusations flew. May pressed her hands to her ears, overwhelmed by the noise, her vision blurring with tears. Everything was spinning out of control, spiraling toward a conclusion she couldn't predict. As the elders called for order, she caught sight of Ethan's eyes locking onto hers. In them she saw desperation, determination, and something else, hope, fragile and flickering, but still there. And then, just as the council prepared to announce their verdict, another figure emerged from the crowd. It was May's grandmother, frail but resolute, leaning heavily on her cane. Her voice, though weak, carried across the square. Enough, she said sharply, silencing the uproar. All eyes turned to her as she shuffled forward, stopping inches from Ethan for a long moment. She studied him, her gaze piercing. Then, in a voice that brooked no argument, she declared, let the boy speak. The command hung in the air, electrifying the atmosphere. Ethan swallowed hard, stepping forward to address the villagers. But before he could utter a word, a loud crash echoed through the square, followed by screams. Heads whipped around to see smoke rising in the distance. The fields were on fire. Panic surged through the crowd as flames licked at the horizon, devouring crops and livelihoods in seconds. In that instant, the battle lines dissolved, replaced by a single shared purpose: survival. That as people scrambled to contain the blaze, May found herself face to face with Ethan once more. "Stay safe," he urged, gripping her shoulders tightly. "I'll handle this." Before she could respond, he disappeared into the chaos, leaving her staring after him, her heart pounding with dread. The fire raged on, consuming everything in its path, and with it, the fragile threads holding their world together threatened to snap completely. As the flames roared through the fields, devouring everything in their path, May felt the ground beneath her feet tremble, not just from the heat and chaos but from the weight of what was happening. The fire wasn't random. It couldn't be. It struck too suddenly, too deliberately, as if someone had orchestrated it to tip the scales in this already volatile situation. Her mind raced back to Daniel's smug expression earlier, his words echoing like a warning. "You were throwing away everything we worked for." Could he have done this? Was this his way of ensuring Ethan's failure and punishing the villagers for daring to challenge him? Ethan moved like a man possessed, barking orders and rallying anyone nearby to help contain the blaze. Villagers grabbed buckets, blankets, anything they could use to beat back the flames, their earlier divisions forgotten in the face of shared catastrophe. But the fire spread faster than anyone anticipated, fueled by dry grass and relentless winds. Smoke filled the air, choking lungs and blurring vision. Amidst the pandemonium, May spotted Daniel lingering at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed, and a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. Her stomach churned with anger and disbelief. She wanted to confront him, to scream at him for what he'd done, but before she could act, a shout pierced through the noise. It was Ethan, his voice hoarse and strained. He was crouched near the edge of the inferno, shielding something or someone with his body. May sprinted toward him, her heart hammering in her chest. When she reached him, she saw that he was protecting an elderly woman who had collapsed while trying to save her livestock. His suit jacket was singed, his hands blackened with soot, but his focus never wavered. "Take her," he urged, gently handing the woman over to May. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, she saw raw determination etched into every line of his face. Whatever doubts she'd harbored about him seemed irrelevant now. All that mattered was surviving the next few minutes. But survival wouldn't come easy. As May helped carry the woman to safety, another explosion rocked the area. Storage shed packed with hay went up in flames, sending fiery embers spiraling into the sky. The heat was unbearable, the crackling of burning wood drowning out all other sounds. May stumbled, her legs giving out beneath her, but strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. Ethan pulled her upright, his grip firm despite the exhaustion evident in his trembling arms. "We can't stay here," he shouted over the roar of the fire. "It's spreading too fast." They retreated toward the village center, where others were gathering survivors and salvaging whatever belongings they could. The scene was one of utter devastation. Charred crops, destroyed homes, and faces streaked with ash and tears. Yet even in the midst of despair there was a flicker of unity. Neighbors who had argued bitterly hours ago now worked side by side, sharing water and comforting each other. For a brief moment, May allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this tragedy could bring them closer together. But then she remembered Daniel, standing apart from the rest, watching the destruction unfold with cold detachment. Hope faltered. By the time the fire began to die down, the damage was staggering. Acres of farmland lay in ruins, leaving the villagers with little more than scorched earth and shattered dreams. Exhausted and covered in soot, Ethan sank onto a pile of rubble, his head in his hands. May hesitated, torn between wanting to comfort him and needing answers. Finally, she knelt beside him, her voice barely audible over the crackling remnants of the blaze. "Did you know about this?" she asked, her tone sharp with accusation. Ethan looked up, his bloodshot eyes meeting hers. "No," he said firmly, shaking his head. "I swear, May, I didn't. This isn't meets him." She followed his gaze to where Daniel stood, surrounded by a small group of men in suits, who had arrived unnoticed during the chaos. They weren't villagers, they were outsiders, corporate envoys sent to seize control of the situation. One of them held a clipboard, rattling off figures and percentages as if discussing profits instead of lives lost. May's fists clenched at her sides, her anger bubbling over. "What are they doing here?" she demanded, turning back to Ethan. Before he could answer, Daniel stepped forward, his smirk widening into a grin. "You see, Ethan," he said, his voice dripping with mockery, "this is why you should have let me handle things my way. People don't change because you throw money at them or play hero. They need to be shown who's in charge." He gestured to the ruins around them, as if presenting a masterpiece. "Now look at what we've accomplished. With the land cleared and the villagers desperate, they'll sign whatever papers we put in front of them. Problem solved." The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. May felt sick, her knees threatening to buckle again. This wasn't just greed, was calculated cruelty, designed to strip the villagers of their dignity and leave them with no choice but to submit. And worst of all, it had worked. Without the fields, without resources, how could they possibly fight back? Ethan rose slowly to his feet, his posture rigid with fury. "You're insane," he growled, taking a step toward Daniel. "Do you really think I'll let you get away with this?" Daniel laughed, a low, chilling sound that sent shivers down May's spine. "Let me, you're in no position to stop us, old friend. Your precious redemption act is over. Face it, you're finished." He glanced pointedly at May, his gaze lingering just long enough to make her skin crawl, and so is she. That threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. May instinctively moved closer to Ethan, her pulse racing. She had always known trusting him came with risks, but now those risks felt impossibly high. If Daniel succeeded, not only would the villagers lose their land, he might destroy any chance of reconciliation between Ethan and the community. Worse still, he clearly saw May as collateral damage, a pawn to be sacrificed in his game of power and profit. Fear gripped her, but alongside it burned a spark of defiance. She wouldn't let him win, not without a fight. As night fell, casting the devastated landscape in eerie shadows, whispers of rebellion began to ripple through the crowd. Despite their exhaustion, the villagers refused to give up. Old Mr. Chen called for an emergency meeting, urging everyone to band together against the corporate takeover. "They think we're weak," he declared, his voice steady despite his frailty. "But we've survived worse. We won't bow to them now." His words reignited a flicker of hope, drawing murmurs of agreement from those gathered. Even May's grandmother, leaning heavily on her cane, nodded in approval. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the hardest battles are worth fighting." Ethan, though battered and weary, stood beside the villagers, his presence a silent vow of solidarity. He knew the odds were stacked against them, the legal documents, the corporate muscle, the sheer scale of what they were up against. But he also knew that walking away wasn't an option. Not after everything they'd been through. Not after seeing May's courage in the face of fear. As plans were made and strategies discussed, May found herself glancing at him repeatedly, searching for signs of doubt or hesitation. Instead, she saw resolve, a quiet strength that reminded her of the man she'd first met, the one who had humbly accepted a bowl of congee without expecting anything in return. Yet even as alliances formed and resistance grew, danger loomed closer. Daniel's men patrolled the outskirts of the village, their presence a constant reminder of the stakes. Rumors spread of bribes offered to key villagers, promises of wealth in exchange for cooperation. Some accepted, lured by desperation. Others resisted, clinging to pride and principle. The division threatened to tear the community apart once again, leaving May and Ethan scrambling to hold it together. Every decision felt like a gamble, every move fraught with peril. And then, just when it seemed like tensions couldn't escalate further, a new twist emerged. A young boy, playing near the ruins of the storage shed, unearthed something hidden beneath the ashes, a pile of documents, partially burned but still legible. They were records detailing illegal transactions, forged signatures, and secret deals, stretching back years, all implicating not just Daniel but several high-ranking officials within Ethan's corporation. The discovery was explosive, a potential weapon capable of dismantling the entire scheme. But getting the evidence into the right hands wouldn't be easy, not with Daniel's men watching their every move. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red, May and Ethan huddled together, poring over the documents. Their fingers brushed accidentally, sending a jolt of electricity through both of them. For a fleeting moment, amidst the wreckage and uncertainty, they shared a glance that spoke volumes. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. But outside, the clock was ticking. Daniel's patience was wearing thin, and the villagers' resolve was being tested. The final showdown was inevitably, and the outcome remained terrifyingly unclear. The discovery of the incriminating documents felt like a lifeline, but it came with its own set of dangers. May clutched the charred pages tightly, her hands trembling as she realized the weight of what they held. These weren't just papers, they were proof of corruption, betrayal, and greed on a scale that went far beyond Daniel's schemes. If exposed, they could bring down not only Ethan's business partner but also the powerful figures backing him, unraveling an entire web of deceit. But exposing them meant risking everything: their safety, the villagers' trust, and perhaps even Ethan's legacy. The stakes had never been higher. As word of the documents spread among the villagers, whispers turned into murmurs of hope. For the first time since the fire, there was a sense of purpose, a belief that justice might still be within reach. Yet, not everyone shared this optimism. Some warned against using the evidence, fearing retaliation from those who stood to lose the most. "Do you think they'll let us walk away if we expose them?" one villager asked, his voice tinged with fear. "They'll crush us before we even get close." His words echoed in May's mind, planting seeds of doubt, even as others rallied around her and Ethan, urging them to take action. Meanwhile, Daniel grew increasingly agitated, pacing near the edge of the village like a predator circling its prey. He hadn't yet discovered the documents, but his instincts told him something was amiss. His gaze kept darting toward May and Ethan, suspicion etched into every line of his face. When he finally approached them, his tone was sharp, almost accusatory. "What are you two hiding?" he demanded, narrowing his eyes. "You've got that look like you're planning something behind my back." Ethan stepped forward, shielding May subtly with his body. "We're not hiding anything," he replied coolly, though his clenched fists betrayed his tension. "Unlike some people, we're focused on helping the villagers rebuild, not tearing them down further." The jab struck a nerve, and Daniel's expression darkened. For a moment, it seemed like he might lash out, but instead, he smirked, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Careful, Ethan," he said softly, leaning in closer. "You're playing a dangerous game, and games like this, they have consequences." His threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. May's pulse quickened as she watched Daniel turn and walk away, his men trailing behind him like shadows. She knew he wouldn't stop until he found what he was looking for, and when he did, there would be no mercy. The realization sent a chill down her spine, but it also hardened her resolve. If Daniel thought she and Ethan would back down, he was wrong. Whatever happened next, they couldn't afford to show weakness. That night, under the cover of darkness, May and Ethan devised a plan. With the help of a few trusted villagers, they decided to smuggle the documents out of the area, delivering them to a journalist known for exposing corporate scandals. It was risky, especially given the constant surveillance by Daniel's men, but it was their best shot at leveling the playing field. As they prepared to execute the plan, May noticed how Ethan's usual composure had shifted. He was quieter, more introspective, as if grappling with the enormity of what they were about to do. "Are you sure about this?" she asked hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, though his jaw was tight with determination. "It's the only way," he said firmly. "If we don't fight back now, they'll win, and not just here. This kind of corruption spreads unless someone stands up to it." His words resonated deeply with May, reminding her of why she'd started trusting him in the first place. Beneath the wealth and influence, he was still a man willing to risk everything for what he believed was right. That knowledge gave her strength, even as fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve. The operation began at midnight, when the village was shrouded in silence. May carried the documents in a weathered satchel slung across her shoulder, while Ethan acted as a decoy, drawing attention away from her path. Their movements were calculated, each step deliberate as they navigated the narrow paths between makeshift shelters and burned fields. The air was thick with tension, every rustle of leaves or distant footfall making her heart race. At one point, she froze, certain she heard voices nearby. But after a tense pause, the sound faded, leaving only the rhythmic chirping of crickets. Just as May reached the outskirts of the village, where a trusted courier waited to transport the documents, chaos erupted. A shout pierced the quiet, followed by the unmistakable sound of running footsteps. Daniel's men had spotted them, more so it seemed. May ducked behind a cluster of trees, clutching the satchel tightly as adrenaline surged through her veins. Through the foliage, she saw Ethan being dragged back toward the center of the village, his arms pinned behind his back, her breath caught in her throat. Had they been caught, or was this part of the plan? Before she could decide, a figure emerged from the shadows beside her. It was old Mr. Chen, his frail frame belying the steel in his gaze. "Go," he urged, his voice low but urgent. "Finish what you started. We'll handle the rest." May hesitated, torn between staying to help Ethan and completing the mission, but Mr. Chen's grip on her arm was firm, unyielding. "Trust him," he said simply, "and trust yourself." With a final glance toward the commotion, May sprinted toward the waiting courier, her legs burning with exertion. As she handed over the satchel, tears pricked her eyes, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was sacrificing. Every step forward felt like a step away from Ethan, from the fragile bond they'd built amidst the ruins of trust and betrayal. Yet she knew deep down that this was necessary, not just for the villagers, but for the future they all deserved. Back in the village, Ethan faced Daniel alone, his wrists bound but his spirit unbroken. "You think this changes anything?" Daniel sneered, circling him like a vulture. "Even if you somehow manage to expose me, the system will protect itself. You're fighting a losing battle." Ethan met his gaze steadily, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Maybe," he admitted, "but sometimes, losing isn't the worst thing. Sometimes, it's worth it if it means standing on the right side of history." Their standoff, while it was interrupted by the arrival of several villagers, led by old Mr. Chen, though outnumbered, they formed a protective barrier around Ethan, their presence a silent declaration of unity. Daniel's confidence wavered, his bravado faltering as he realized the tide was turning against him for the first time. He looked unsure, vulnerable, but before anyone could act, the distant roar of engines broke the silence. Vehicles approaching, fast, headlights cutting through the darkness. Panic rippled through the crowd as armed guards poured into the village, their allegiance unclear. May, now miles away, felt a pang of dread as she imagined the scene unfolding behind her. Had Daniel called in reinforcements, or was this something else entirely? Either way, the outcome remained uncertain, the climax of their struggle drawing nearer with each passing second. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, the fate of the village and of the love blossoming between May and Ethan hung precariously in the balance. The days that followed were a mix of rebuilding and reflection, each dawn bringing both challenges and small victories. The villages, once fractured by mistrust and fear, now worked together with a unity that surprised even themselves. Ethan threw himself into the effort, rolling up his sleeves to dig trenches, haul supplies, and plant new seeds alongside those who had once viewed him as an outsider. It wasn't easy. His hands blistered, his back ached, and there were moments when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, but he found solace in the rhythm of honest labor. For the first time in years, he felt grounded, connected to something greater than himself. May watched him from afar sometimes, marveling at how much he had changed since their paths crossed. Gone was the polished CEO who seemed untouchable. In his place stood a man willing to get dirt under his nails for the sake of others. Yet, she couldn't shake the memory of his confession about his father, or the lingering question of whether forgiveness could truly erase the scars left by history. Late at night, as they sat together beneath the stars, she would ask him about it, probing gently until he opened up. "I don't expect you to forget," he told her one evening, his voice heavy with regret. "All I can do is prove that I'm not him, that I want to be better." Her grandmother, frail but sharp-witted, often joined these conversations, offering wisdom shaped by decades of hardship. "People aren't defined by their bloodlines," she said one night, her gaze steady on Ethan. "They're defined by what they choose to carry forward and what they leave behind." Her words resonated deeply, planting a seed of hope in May's heart. Perhaps redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but learning to live alongside it, transforming pain into purpose. As the weeks passed, the village began to heal, piece by piece. With the help of Ethan's mother, who proved herself more than just a figurehead, resources poured in to rebuild homes, restore irrigation systems, and replant crops. She brought architects, engineers, and agricultural experts who collaborated with the villagers rather than imposing solutions. Slowly, the fields that had been reduced to ash came alive again, sprouting green shoots that symbolized resilience. The sight filled May with quiet pride, not because of what she had done alone, but because of what they had achieved together. Ethan's relationship with his mother also evolved during this time. Their interactions were tentative at first, marked by awkward silences and unspoken guilt. But as they worked side by side, listening to the stories of those affected by their family's actions, a fragile understanding began to form. One afternoon, while inspecting the progress of a newly constructed well, she turned to him with tears in her eyes. "I should have stopped your father," she admitted, her voice trembling, "but I chose comfort over courage. I won't make that mistake again." He nodded, accepting her apology without needing to say a word. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't instantaneous. It was built, brick by brick, through shared effort and vulnerability. Meanwhile, Daniel's arrest sent shockwaves through the corporate world, exposing a network of corruption that reached far beyond the village. Journalists wrote exposes detailing the illegal land deals, forged documents, and bribes that had fueled the Langston Empire for generations. Public outrage mounted, leading to investigations into other companies tied to similar practices. While Ethan distanced himself from the scandal, severing ties with those complicit in the wrongdoing, he knew his name would forever be linked to the fallout. But instead of hiding from it, he embraced the opportunity to advocate for transparency and accountability within the business community. His speeches at industry conferences drew mixed reactions. Some praised his courage, while others accused him of hypocrisy. But he pressed on, driven by a newfound sense of responsibility. For May, the changes brought both relief and uncertainty. On one hand, the threat of losing her home and heritage had been lifted, replaced by the promise of stability. On the other hand, she struggled with the weight of newfound attention. Reporters continued to visit the village, eager to document the story of the poor girl who had taken on a billionaire and won. At first she avoided them, letting Ethan handle the media inquiries, but eventually she decided to speak out, sharing her perspective not as a victim but as someone determined to reclaim her narrative. "This isn't just about me," she told a journalist during one interview. "It's about all of us, proving that even when everything is taken away, we still have the power to rebuild." Her words resonated widely, inspiring people across the country to stand up against exploitation and injustice. Letters and messages poured in from strangers thanking her for giving them hope. And while May appreciated the support, she remained humble. "I didn't do anything special," she insisted to anyone who asked. "I just did what I had to do." Yet deep down, she knew that journey had transformed her. She no longer saw herself as powerless. Instead, she recognized the strength that came from standing firm in the face of adversity. As the seasons shifted, bringing cooler breezes and golden harvests, May and Ethan's bond grew stronger. They spent long hours walking through the fields, talking about everything and nothing, their connection deepening with each passing day. Love, they discovered, wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about showing up, even when things got messy. When Ethan finally asked her to move to the city with him, promising to build a life together, she hesitated. The village was her home, the land, her roots. Leaving felt like abandoning a part of herself. Sensing her hesitation, Ethan offered a compromise. "What if we split our time?" he suggested. "You belong here, and I respect that, but maybe there's room for both worlds." His willingness to adapt touched her. reminding her that love wasn't about sacrificing who you were but finding someone who celebrated it. After much thought, she agreed, envisioning a future where she could honor her roots while embracing new possibilities. Their partnership extended beyond personal relationships. Together, they founded an initiative aimed at supporting rural communities facing similar struggles, providing legal aid, financial resources, and advocacy training. The project quickly gained traction, earning praise from activists and policymakers alike. May became its public face, traveling to conferences and workshops to share her experiences, while Ethan handled the logistics, ensuring funds were allocated fairly and transparently. Watching them work together, villagers joked that they made a formidable team, one rooted in grit and determination, the other in strategy and influence. Old Mr. Chen, ever the wise elder, summed it up best during a village gathering held to celebrate their progress. "Life doesn't give us guarantees," he said, leaning heavily on his cane, "but it does give us choices. And sometimes, those choices lead us to places we never imagined." His words echoed in May's mind as she looked around at the faces of her neighbors, their smiles brighter than they'd been in years. Despite the hardships they'd endured, they had emerged stronger, united by a shared vision of the future. In the end, the story wasn't just about May and Ethan, it was about resilience, redemption, and the power of collective action. It was about choosing to fight for what mattered, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And those scars remained, reminders of battles fought and lessons learned. They served as testaments to the strength required to overcome them. As May stood hand in hand with Ethan, watching the sun set over the fields that had borne witness to their journey, she felt a profound sense of peace. Life, she realized, wasn't about avoiding storms, it was about learning to dance in the rain.